Yeah, it was inter-imperialist colonialist competition. Yes, exactly. And Turkey, in its developmentary stages, was like, we are not participating. We are not participating in World War II at all. When Germany wanted to reinstate the alliance. Is there? Susurluk. When people say, Hasan, why are you anti-NATO? When people say, Hasan, why are you anti-NATO as a Turkish person? I suspect that the many different mentions of how all matter of revolutionary and socialist movements in Turkey were and are the Turkish Milli İstihbarat Teşkilatı, and how it was propped up, created, designed by the Americans, by the CIA, and how how NATO propped up the mafia, the Turkish mafia, alongside the creation of the Turkish ultranationalist movement, the Grey Wolves, and how they destroyed any matter of Turkish socialism in Turkey in an identical fashion to Gladio in Italy, as a matter of fact. Let's watch.
On an early November evening in 1996, a black Mercedes, traveling at nearly 110 miles per hour, crashed into a truck near Susurluk in western Turkey. 3 of the 4 passengers in the car died instantly. When a few local journalists arrived at the scene, they had expected to find a irregular car accident. But what they discovered would shock Turkey to the core.
Kanal D.
Among the accident victims, notorious contract killer for a CIA-assisted secret organization, Abdullah Çatlı, who was also a leader of the fascist Grey Wolves and an underworld drug lord wanted by Interpol, and his girlfriend, former beauty queen Gonca Uz. So far so good, nothing to be shocked about. But who else was in this car? The third victim, Istanbul Deputy Police Chief Hüseyin Bocada. The fourth person, the seriously injured Sedat Bucak, was a conservative member of parliament who was also a big landowner and a leader of several state-supported village guard units engaged in the war against Kurdish liberation fighters. Now, this is not good. Why the hell were a police chief, a politician, and a fascist criminal in the same car? It's not as if these people just happened to share an Uber pool or something. No serious arrests were made after the incident, and the concrete ties between the passengers remain shrouded in mystery to this day. In what came to be known as the Susurluk scandal, parliamentary investigations scratched the surface of a vast shadow network involved in one of the bloodiest and most mysterious periods in the modern history of Turkey. An interconnected web of Turkish police, military, secret service, politicians, criminal bosses, fascist paramilitaries, and the CIA, united by a common goal: eliminate communism. Turkey, officially the Republic of Türkiye, is situated on the Anatolian Peninsula in Western Asia, spanning across 2 continents, giving it an important geopolitical position and making it a regional power of significance. As an early member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, the Turkish armed forces constitute the second largest standing military force in NATO. Turkey also hosts the Incirlik Air Base, operated and controlled by the US Air Force, which served as a main hub for operations during the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Ankara, Turkey's second largest city, serves as the nation's capital, while Istanbul, its largest city, acts as the primary financial hub. Turkey currently ranks as the world's 20th largest economy in terms of nominal GDP. This February, more than 50,000 people lost their lives following the terrifying earthquakes in Turkey and Syria, and the disastrous effects and the response are dramatically worsened by the profit-based system and the according corruption of the government. Kurdish regions are hit especially hard, and there's a history behind this. Turkey was already in a horrible situation this year with inflation soaring and its currency collapsing. On top of it, the country is headed toward the general election on May 14, in which the current president is expected to use all available means to stay in power. His opponent, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, leader of the Republican People's Party, or short CHP, formed an alliance appealing to voters from the liberal left to the conservative right. We'll look at the important history of that party soon. Since 2002, Turkey's political system has been under the rule of the Justice and Development Party, or AKP, and its leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Under Erdogan, the country has faced recession and stagnation in the last decade, accompanied by high inflation in this year, and went through a shift from a parliamentary republic to an executive presidential system, eroding the so-called separation of powers in bourgeois democracy. Traditionally, the prime minister position has been more important, but since the 2017 referendum, the prime minister position has been abolished, and now the president has much greater executive power.
Videoyu yükleyen Türk mü yoksa değil mi? Galiba Almancı. Bilmiyorum. Bu kadar fazla bilmez çünkü normalde. Bu Almanya'da da Almancı olma ihtimali var yani. Çünkü yoksa nereden bilir bu kadar bilmiyorum yani Türk yani Türkiye'nin tarihini.
In order to more fully grasp Turkish politics.
Abi yok, ben bu elemandan özellikle istedim araştırıp yapmasını. Ha öyle mi? Ben zannediyorum ki belki hani Kürt Almancı olabilir.
Turkey's role within imperialism today and the roots of the fascistic character of its political system. We need to turn the clock back by exactly 100 years. After the Ottoman Empire broke apart 1 century ago, the Republic of Turkey was proclaimed in 1923 after the so-called War of Independence by the country's first president, Ebedi Şef, Eternal Chief, Mustafa Kemal, honored with the name Atatürk, Father of the Turks, and the founder of the oldest political party of Turkey, the aforementioned Republican People's Party, or CHP. But Turkey didn't actually gain real independence. It was still a semi-colonial country. What does that mean? Before the War of Independence, the Ottoman Empire had been declining as it was ridden with crises and got outcompeted by the Western European imperialist powers. It was considered the sick man of Europe. As it slowly dissolved, it was economically dependent on Germany and was pressured to fight on its side during World War I.
You like Atatürk? I feel about Atatürk as I feel about America's founders as well. You know, there's some good there, and then there's a lot of bad there as well. Ultimately, it's not identical to a bourgeois revolution against the monarchy, but, you know.
After the loss of the Central Powers, it got pillaged by French and British capital. The European imperialists were about to seize much of trade and industry, and the Turkish ruling class faced a life-or-death struggle. The emerging bourgeoisie, or capitalist class, united with the feudal gentry and the landlords, managed to take leadership.
Yeah, he's definitely better in the sense that he didn't own slaves. So there's that, but to be fair, it is much, much later as well.
In the independence struggle and consolidated the republic under a one-party state, formally abolishing the Sultanate and liberating the occupied territories. But the Turkish economy remained dependent, i.e., it provided cheap raw materials and workforce to the imperialists and opened a market for their industrial products. Large banks, transport routes, as well as parts of industry were still in the hands of foreign companies. This dependency would lead Turkey into a huge trade deficit in the 40s, further seeking foreign loans, subjugating the country and holding back independent industrial development. But not everyone lost due to this dependency. The Turkish capitalist class made a massive fortune through this collaboration in exploiting the toiling masses in Turkey, seizing properties of Anatolian Greeks and Armenians, and pandered to the imperialist fear of rising communism after the October Revolution in Russia in 1917. And anti-communism would unite them throughout the century, both ideologically and in terms of concrete organization. This analysis was key for one of the, if not the most notable Turkish communist, Ibrahim Kaypakaya, who would later criticize the Turkish left, which proposed such things as emphasizing an alliance with the Kemalist movement, painting them as an independent progressive revolutionary force. However, Kaipakaya wrote, quote, "The Kemalists, even during the years of the Liberation War, were embarking on collaboration with the imperialists. They did not neglect to carry out covert collaboration with them against the Socialist Soviet Union externally and against communists, working class, and other toiling people internally. On the other hand, while raining down the most extreme compliments in order to obtain aid, on the other were seeking a basis for secret agreements to be made with the US, Britain, and France. The Kemalist dictatorship is a military fascist dictatorship over the workers, peasants, urban petty bourgeoisie, low-ranking public servants, and Democrat intellectuals." Toward the end of the 19th century, Marxist ideas had begun to penetrate Turkish society, and various Turkish communist groups had begun...
Not to get you into trouble with Turkish chatters, but do you think Kemal Pasha was a MI6 plant similar to Reza Pahlavi? No, I don't think so.
...to emerge, not just in Turkey. Some emigre workers in Germany, referred to as the Turkish Spartakists, had joined up with...
I think he was, and some of that, like some of the revolutions that came about as a consequence of his like Yoruba attitude were actually good. Like things that I also personally believe were very socially progressive and like a legitimately good thing. Yeah, he was a Franco-boo, big French Revolution head for sure. That's why laïcité was implemented as well.
Rosa Luxemburg and the other Spartakists in Germany, and sought to bring the lessons of the November Revolution back home. These groups would then merge into the Communist Party of Turkey, or short TKP, in Baku. Only 1 year after the TKP was founded in 1920, its founder, Mustafa Sufi, and the entire 14-member leadership were brutally assassinated, most likely on the order of Mustafa Kemal, after being lured on a boat at the Black Sea. Sufi's Russian wife, Maria, was taken hostage, abused, and used as a sex slave by the murderers. In 1923, the state closed down the Istanbul Workers' Association, arrested its leaders, and formed its own bourgeois unions to draw people away from workers' organizations. Already in 1920,
kind of like AFL-CIA.
Mustafa Kemal had set up a fake puppet communist party to counter the growing influence of the actual communists. The actual Communist Party was then banned in 1925 and had to operate underground throughout the 20th century. In 1927, railway workers organized a massive strike lasting for 2 weeks against a French company operating in Turkey. Hundreds of workers and their family members laid down on the tracks, and the Kemalist government dispatched a military unit which opened fire on the unarmed workers and their families, covering the rails in blood. With the extensive adoption of the Codice Rocco, the fascist penal code enacted under Mussolini in Italy, paragraphs 141 and 142 found their way into Turkish law, prohibiting any organization of class-based associations and imposing the death penalty on anyone leading them. The Atatürk reforms made Turkey into a secular modern state, but Mustafa Kemal also wanted to create a homogeneous Turkey. What was meant by this, the minority ethnic groups had to experience brutally. The Kurds, living predominantly in the southeast or in northern Kurdistan, make up around 20 to 25% of Turkey's population. Atatürk, called them Mountain Turks, banned the Kurdish language in schools, prohibiting speaking Kurdish in public spaces, Kurdish newspapers, and Kurdish parties. Hundreds of thousands of Kurds were forcibly deported out of Turkey to Turkify the region. After Kurds rebelled against the repression, the state initiated a pogrom in the Kurdish majority region of Diyarbakir, burning down villages and killing over 15,000 people. Later in the 30s, the Turkish armed forces were sent to crush a Zaza Kurdish rebellion in the notorious Dersim genocide, in which tens of thousands of people were massacred. Atatürk's Turkification was in line with the previous regime of the Young Turks, which committed the Armenian genocide, murdering over 1.5 million Armenians, with only a fraction of the Armenian population surviving. The Turkish government denies the genocide to this day. From 1935, German imperialism would regain its influence over Turkey. Germany helped train Turkish soldiers and was Turkey's primary source for armaments, and the Nazis would find great admiration among their quickly growing Turkish counterparts. Ultranationalists in Turkey had excellent relations with Nazi Germany, and its most notorious representative, Colonel Alparslan Türkeş, was the contact person of the Nazis in Turkey. He would frequently quote Hitler's Mein Kampf in his speeches, and his so-called pan-Turkist movement's support for Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini was strong. Ruzi Nazar, another prominent pan-Turkist, joined the Nazis on the Eastern Front to fight for the creation of a Turkistan. Nazar was later recruited by the Americans and became the CIA's station chief in Turkey. More on that later. The pseudoscientific pan-Turkism movement, with its doctrine of racial superiority, sees as its goal the political and cultural unification of all Turkic peoples. Since many ethnic Turks lived in the Soviet Union, the movement naturally linked its reactionary ideology to the destruction of the Soviet Union and communism. It was not until 1945 when Turkey declared war on Germany.
How does Turkey deny the Armenian genocide? They say that it is, one, they say it is a lie. And two, it's taught in schools as like a forced immigration of Armenians into Syria. Specifically like a Trail of Tears type situation, exactly, where like in the most reductive terms, it basically is Armenians collaborated in the villages in the eastern part of Turkey with the Russians because they were Orthodox Christians, just like the Russians were during World War I, and they engaged in pogroms against Turkish Muslim populations and like Turkish populations. And so the Turkish military came in and forcibly removed them from their homes and forced them to basically march to Syria and many other places. And then some people died alongside in that process. Like that's the way that it is described. Well, but it is a deliberate, systematic, targeted ethnic cleansing campaign, of course.
When it was pretty much clear that they were losing. Nazi Germany was defeated, but fascism was not. In collaboration with the new...
The official Turkish government position on obviously World War II was neutrality, like, or not even neutrality, but just not collaborating with the Germans. In World War I, if you guys remember, talked about this before, World War I, Turkey was aligned with Germany. World War I is obviously very different than World War II in general. World War I in and of itself is just a world war amongst... superpowers, all colonial superpowers, central powers fighting against one another, and utilizing that as a way to, pick apart other colonies. That's how England took over, British Palestinian Mandate from the Ottoman Empire, for example. And yeah, it was imperialist colonialist competition. Yes, exactly. And Turkey, in its developmentary stages, was like, we are not participating. We are not participating in World War II at all. When Germany wanted to reinstate the alliance that Turkey or the Ottoman Empire previously had.
Imperialist master, the United States. The pan-Turkist leaders would play a key role in the brutal unleashing of fascist violence against the left in Turkey. After the defeat of Nazi Germany, the US was by far the dominant capitalist imperialist power in the world. But there was no time to rest for the Yankees. There was still a more potent enemy out there, growing in popularity, not least due to the Soviet Union's central role in the defeat of Hitler. US President Harry Truman announced the Truman Doctrine, a plan to contain the Soviet Union and rising communist organization, particularly in Greece and Turkey, by asking Congress for $400 million in military and economic assistance, specifically for Greece and Turkey. In his address to Congress,
the Dersim massacre was posed at a progressive cause and people believed it. Dersim is not just about being Kurdish, though. State was also trying to outlaw old feudal systems and serfdom. Fascists took advantage of this very well.
In 1947, Truman stressed, quote, "Should we fail Greece and Turkey in this fateful hour, the effect will be far-reaching to the west as well as to the east. We must take immediate and resolute action." The request was approved in 1948, the same year.
That video blames every other country but not Turkey. Wait, what? Dude, if you think this video is not completely fucking anti everything Turkey related and how you're lost in the sauce, I think.
When Turkey joined the Marshall Plan and was admitted into the IMF. The United States was now the chief imperialist partner of the Turkish state, but it was more than just a partner. Meanwhile, in 1948, in northern Turkey, a certain someone, whom the Turkish state would consider as the most dangerous revolutionary and a serious threat to the government, saw the light of day. Born into a poor peasant Alevi family, Ibrahim Kaypakaya would later become the foremost manifestation of the revolutionary communist line of the Turkish proletariat. A symbol of camaraderie and the armed struggle, he would live a short life, but an important one. At the time of his birth, the Turkish government underwent certain changes to adapt to the new imperial...
Dersim still is a relatively big stronghold for socialism. Dersim supports current CHP, CHP, TKP, Turkish Communist Party, and DEM, the Kurdish majority party. Dersim is a stronghold for the socialists. If you recall, I mean, way back in the day when they directly elected a dirty commie in Dersim as well.
Realist world order. Within the Turkish ruling class, a variety of cliques with competing interests formed their separate parties. The newly created center-right Democrat Party, or short, DP, was one of them, founded by former members of the CHP, most prominently by the soon infamous Prime Minister Adnan Menderes. In the car, the shift from a one-party government to a multi-party state wasn't out of an idealist concern for democracy. The then President İsmet İnönü, known as the right-hand man of Mustafa Kemal, knew very well that if opposition parties weren't included, Turkey would fall to social rebellion. Calls for freedom of speech and so on were of course justified, but primarily it was because, quote, the comprador big bourgeoisie and landlords clique in opposition wanted the same thing for themselves. On the other hand, the international situation is forcing the bourgeoisie and landlord class to adopt parliament, since an open terrorist dictatorship that abolishes parliament will expose its fascist visage both to the popular masses domestically and world public opinion and be isolated. This is the function of parliament in Turkey, to mask fascism. The government had introduced a trade union law which was supposed to fulfill the, quote, necessity of Western democracy.
Like something to remember, because it's Turkey and where there's a predominantly Western audience, like what he's describing there is a socialist framework on the Turkish parliament, and therefore it is no different than like the American bourgeois democracy. Okay? Something to remind people is that fundamentally, it is a democracy identical to the American democracy or democracy that you see in European countries. It is, however, a bourgeois democracy. And therefore, that is a socialist critique of bourgeois democracy and not necessarily saying it's fake.
Legalizing the formation of trade unions, but maintaining the ban on strikes. Unions also had to be apolitical and, quote, nationally oriented instead of internationalist. In order to control the emerging labor movement, the Turkish Ministry of Labor, with the help of US advisors, such as the anti-communist organizer and later leader of the US Trade Union Federation, AFL-CIO, Erwin Brown, established the Turkish, the Confederation of Turkish Workers Union. Its leader declared to struggle, quote, against the abominable communism. The state-affiliated trade union would receive lots of funding from the Agency for International Development, a US body that works closely with the CIA. In its program some years later, the union declared that it, quote, pursues a policy that has the aim of eliminating the causes of the deepening of class differences and class conflicts, and aims to establish balance, peace, and cooperation between the classes. After World War I, Irving Brown, along with CPUSA member turned CIA help.
What is bourgeois democracy? Is it a bad thing if we have it? Bourgeois democracy, is it a bad thing if we have it? I mean, if you're a worker, it's not great for you. If you're a liberal, you think it's great. It's the peak of democracy. I don't know. Do you think our current two-party system that seemingly always aligns on certain boundaries that pertain to improving material conditions for all Americans unconditionally is a good thing? Then yeah, you'll see it as a good thing. You'll see it as a positive. It always has the capacity to erode civil liberties and also greatly worsen material conditions for the working class, as we cover on a daily basis. So I would say that there is probably a better evolution beyond that. Liberal democracy, bourgeois democracy is significantly better than monarchies, of course. But I personally believe that it's time for a evolution.
Helper J. Lovestone became known as splitters of unions who organized against communist influence in the labor movement. Brown gave money to anti-communist currents which broke strikes in Italy or France, for instance. It's really amazing how far Western powers went and still go to pacify workers and hinder them from developing revolutionary consciousness. The Menderes clique was more sympathetic toward the US, and it had a more positive stance toward conservative religious groups than the CHP, thus gaining support from sections frustrated with Kemalist secularization. With the rising influence of the US, the DP further bolstered its potential for electoral victory because it coincided with the American wishes to privatize state enterprises and a general westernization of Turkey. After the DP's rise to power, Turkey sent troops to the Korean War in 1950 to ensure membership in NATO, which had formed in 1949. Anti-communist persecution intensified and coincided with McCarthyism in the US. The state targeted not just organized Marxists, but university professors and various progressive intellectuals and journalists. American experts poured in to advise Turkey in westernizing education, teaching children the merits of self-responsibility, the evils of collectivism, reintroducing religious courses, and connect them to anti-progressive propagandizing, showing anti-communist educational movies, and so on.
I don't know if he mentions this, but Adnan Menderes, by the way, is obviously very right-wing, religious, conservative, populist, and is like his movement of religious conservative populism is basically what ultimately gave way to Recep Tayyip Erdogan, which comes from that same background and same clique, and also Fethullah Gülen. Now, Fethullah Gülen and Recep Tayyip Erdogan are two sides of the same coin. However, one is directly aligned with the CIA, and the other one happens to be the president now, previously prime minister, now president of Turkey. They're all, yeah, Shatter said hepsi tarikatçı. So tarikat is like the fundies of Turkey, if that makes sense. And Fethullah Gülen operates a cult, a religious Muslim cult, very fundamentalist, and happens to do so from the comfort of his home in the Poconos. Adnan Menderes'e laf ediyorsun ama bilmiyorsun. Yapma abi, yapma. %100 top of the hour ad break çakacaksın şimdi, değil mi? Amına koyayım senin kodlama 0. He's trying to fucking serve me a 3-minute ad break debate in Turkish. Yakalarım. Abi burada Ohio'da FETÖ okulu varmış yaşadığım yerde. Siyah Amerikalı adam Türkçe biliyor. Karşıma çıktı amına koyayım. Evet. Her yerde var ki. Amerika'da her yerde var. Afrika'da her yerde var. Amerikan parasıyla açıyorlar. CIA. Anyway. Yeah, at the top of the hour, there is a 3-minute ad break. Oğlum Adnan Öven adamın bu chatte ne işi var? Sikeceğim. Hayır. Taşak geçiyor. Debate atmaya çalışıyor şey. Ondan sonra dönüp diyecek ki 3 dakikalık advertisement break geliyor. Dedi zaten. Debate oğlu. Anyway. Dedim bile görmedin ha. Bak. Her saat başı 3 dakikalık reklam olacaktır demiş Adnan Menderes. Senin amına koyayım. Kayboldu diyorlar FETÖ burada. Orada haber olmadı değil mi? Yok, ne haber olacak burada? Americans don't know who the fuck Fethullah Gülen is. They don't care. They don't know. It's just like he's just some random dude. There are so many Fethullah Gülen types in the United States of America that like most Americans have no fucking clue. There's a Fethullah Gülen for every country that America is involved in. Like some fucking rabid, fundamentalist, right-wing weirdo that the CIA keeps on payroll and protects. For every country that America has an involvement in. Yeah, and his freedom is one of his main guys. The forward-facing side of Fethullah Gülen's influence. But I'm unfamiliar with the... Wait, what? Kara Swisher AOC podcast mentioned me? Karis Wisher did a podcast with AOC and she mentioned me. Oh, let's go.
Dissemination in some form.
We'll look at that in a sec. We'll look at that later. At 58:18. Okay. Anyway, let's continue. But something to consider. The reason why I brought up Menderes, I don't know how deep he will go into Adnan Menderes, but like his influence and his religious movement, religious conservative populist movement was so significant in Turkish politics now that like the leading coalition and more importantly, Recep Tayyip Erdogan himself personally and the fucking CIA asset living in the goddamn Poconos is all a part of his like cultish movement.
The Pentagon was also aware that fostering and utilizing reactionary Turkish nationalism would serve their strategic interests, as it was a potent deterrent against communist ideas. The Office of Policy Coordination, OPC, was the covert action arm of the CIA and unambiguously called in its charter for, quote, propaganda, economic warfare, preventative direct action, including sabotage, anti-sabotage, demolition and evacuation measures, subversion against hostile states, and support of indigenous anti-communist elements. Indigenous anti-communist elements is, of course, a much nicer expression than fascists. By the end of 1951, Turkey had received over $400 million in military aid along with 1,200 US military advisors. Within the next 3 decades, Turkey would receive a further $5.8 billion in military support, including training programs and arms supply. Those aid packages, as usual, had hundreds of strings attached, such as Turkey allowing the Americans to restructure its military and secret service apparatus, or the commitment to buy US products. One example of that is the US forcing Turkey to focus on building automobile highways and airports as opposed to railroads, through obliging them to focus on importing automobiles and petroleum, which are of course a much bigger opportunity to make a profit. Then, naturally in 1952, Turkey officially became a member of NATO. The country was key for the Western powers, guarding a third of NATO's total borders with the communist bloc and serving as an important balcony for US operations in the Middle East. And then, as left organization, demonstrations...
This is the part that is like the most important as far as like my anger and resentment for NATO. As a Turkish person, this is where you will now develop a better understanding of what NATO does in other countries.
And the opposition to US imperialism intensified. In the shadows of the NATO membership announcement, a secret, bloody fascist network had already begun to spread its tentacles. As a result of Turkey becoming an appendage of US imperialism, and due to the rapidly rising popularity of communist and progressive ideas, it naturally became involved with the notorious Operation Gladio, a secret army intelligence complex organized by NATO and the CIA in collaboration with intelligence agencies throughout Europe to counter the communist threat. Gladio was so powerful and vast, and yet the intelligence agencies managed to largely keep it a secret for decades. It was not until the 90s when it was officially revealed by Italian politician Giulio Andreotti. The revelation was a bombshell and made waves around the world. The operation was particularly brutal in Italy, Greece, and Turkey. In each of these countries, violent fascist or neo-Nazi groups were used to crush the left, such as in Italy, where progressive movements were infiltrated and where fascist terrorist attacks were blamed on the left wing to discredit it, all with the help of state security. I've made a video on Gladio in Italy, which you should check out after watching this. But it is in Turkey where the secret army was the most violent and brutal. The Turkish branch of Gladio was created in the same year when Turkey joined NATO under the codename Counterguerilla, and it was located in the building of the Joint American Military Mission for Aid in the Turkish capital, Ankara.
Wait, what? Why would that be there? That's so strange.
The largest of the US European commands. And who was one of its founding members? None other than the aforementioned Hitlerite Alparslan Türkeş. The Turkish National Security Service, MAH, received financial support from the CIA. Leading members of the Turkish Gladio were recruited from this agency. The CIA under Allen Dulles assigned former Nazi officers, Wehrmacht General Reinhard Gehlen, Butcher of Lyon and Che Guevara hunter Klaus Barbie, and various other fascists to train the Gladio leaders, including MAH officers in the camps from the Unconventional Warfare Department.
Wait, what?
In 1951, the Communist Party was...
Wait, what? No, wait. I thought we were fighting the World War II and the D-Day and we fought the Nazis. Wait, say it ain't so. You mean to tell me that we collaborated with some of the worst Nazis, like famous ones? Wasn't there a story that we read on the stream recently about how Mossad found Klaus Barbie and then were ordered to stand down? I'm trying to find that article now. Chad, this is what people mean when they say Germany lost the war but fascism won? Yes.
Was crushed, and all of its leaders and most members were imprisoned through the notorious mass arrests ordered.
Why do you always say America bad, Hasan? So what if they funded and collaborated with Nazis globally to support fascist movements that slaughtered political dissidents? Yeah. Just weird that I would have such an opinion.
By the Menderes government, in full coherence, of course, with its proclamations of multi-party democracy. The Turkish Gladio was already active here, but it was not until a few years later in 1955 when it was involved in its first major operation. The Democrat Party orchestrated a secret action along with the counter-guerrilla to bomb Thessaloniki in Greece, in the house where Atatürk was born. The so-called free press in Turkey would then spread the story suggesting that it was the Greeks who
Atamızın evi bomba ile hasara uğradı.
set off the bomb. What followed would result in thousands of Greeks fleeing their homes, in what came to be known as the Istanbul pogrom, or
Today your coverage is pretty bad, Hasan. What do you mean? Dude, I already ran the top of the hour ad break if you're doing that. Sen Selanik göçmeni miydin, öyle bir şeydi? I thought I was from Selanik. I thought my parents had told me that we're from Selanik, and then the Wikipedia page says we're from Drama, my father's side, which apparently is true. I was wrong my whole life. Not from Selanik, but from Crete and also Drama. Am I saying that right? I don't even know.
The state, along with the counter-guerrilla, carried out and supported mob attacks against Greeks, Armenian, or Jewish people, destroying their small businesses or abusing hundreds of Greek women, with the police being demonstrably present and doing nothing. And in the most ridiculous way possible, Menderes then blamed the communists, who had been themselves already crushed by the state, for carrying out those pogroms. And subsequently, 45 so-called card-carrying communists were arrested. This type of false flag action and propaganda was a core tool of the Gladio operations, not just in Turkey. The Menderes government grew increasingly unpopular. Money from the Marshall Plan ran out, and after the first severe economic crisis of Turkish capitalism in the 50s, it lost the support of both the parliament and the people. Under the pressure from the US, which saw Turkey as a breadbasket of the West, the DP had unilaterally promoted the agricultural sector with the funds of the Marshall Plan and renounced the development of heavy industry. Due to the massive foreign trade deficit amounting to 60% of total exports, urgently needed industrial goods such as machines and raw materials could no longer be imported. By borrowing from the World Bank and the IMF, Turkey continued to run up debt until it could no longer pay its foreign debts. Menderes reacted to the opposition by arresting his political rivals and critical journalists. Unfortunately, much of the indignation of the Turkish masses was channeled into organizations who
Whether they traded our parents and grandparents? Yeah, they traded our grandparents.
were themselves reactionary. As Kaipakaya wrote, since there was no communist leadership to show the way to the masses, the popular opposition followed this or that reactionary clique and was squandered. This is what always happens in situation of crises. Frustration and indignation get co-opted and channeled into movements that don't endanger the capitalist system, such as reformism and even fascism. Menderes was then deposed and was executed in the 1960 coup d'etat by the military officers, the first of several coups in the Republic of Turkey. The CIA-linked and US-trained Alparslan Türkeş was one of those commanders, and his clique wished to implement its fascist program. But the faction favoring a multi-party system around the coup leader, General Cemal Gürsel, who then became president, won out, and a new constitution was approved in 1961. The US wasn't too worried about this, as Gürsel quickly emphasized, Turkey remains faithful to its Western alliance. Now, former Prime Minister İsmet İnönü of the CHP was once again elected to restore freedom. Unsurprisingly, that didn't last very long.
Here's where the Grey Wolves come in.
Colonel Alparslan Türkeş attempted again to take power in 1963, but his coup attempt failed and he was put in jail. Comically, he was then released shortly afterward on the basis of a supposed lack of evidence. Now he was free to greatly affect Turkish politics in the coming years. In 1965, he founded the infamous National Action Party, short MHP, and more importantly, along...
It's just so strange how this guy... Yeah, Menderes was not a freedom fighter himself. He comes from feudal roots, feudal landlord, massive landlord, wealthy family. It's just so odd that this guy just keeps coming back and is building this ultra-nationalist fascist party. What an impressive story. You know, real rags the richest type shit. You know what I mean? It's just so odd how that... Surely the U.S. has no involvement. Surely. I mean, what? That's crazy.
Along with it, its youth organization and fascist paramilitary wing, the notorious Bozkurtlar, known in English as the Grey Wolves. Its ideology, the superiority of the Turkish race. Quote, what is the source of this superiority? The Turkish blood. Its goal, Turan, a united Turk state from Eastern Europe to Xinjiang.
This is part of the reason why I've always made a shit ton of jokes. I hope this is a little bit more illuminating for many of you in this chat who never really quite understood why I would like have so much smoke for someone like Vosh, before the goblin porn stuff. Because you were like, what? I don't understand. Like, he's just pro-NATO and you're anti-NATO. It was additionally laughable. And you will find out exactly why in a brief moment. It is additionally laughable that that community also happened to claim, while being pro-NATO themselves, mind you, that I was anti-Kurdish. And I was a pan-Turanist, Turk supremacist, anti-Kurdish, you know, Turkish guy. It was just odd. It was odd and weird and funny because, like, you know, I do meme a lot about the Grey Wolves and shit like that. But it's pretty funny that they're saying that, like, my anti-NATO position makes me a fascist when NATO and Turkey, much like NATO in all of these other countries like Greece and Italy, is pro-fascist.
Quote, our struggle goes to the last man, to the last breath, to the last drop of blood.
Your points are really valid, but someone who watches you both for years, I don't think you disagree here. I think it's miscommunication from fans of clips. No, that motherfucker did literally say I'm anti-Kurd. Okay, he did. And he is also pro-NATO, so get the fuck out of here.
Our struggle continues until nationalist Turkey, until Turan is reached. The CIA and NATO-trained Türkeş initiated the movement with the purpose to establish a nationalist movement that could counter the communist efforts domestically and...
This is pretty important. The Turanist movement is very important as a anti-communist measure, both inside of Turkey and also, as Bestie Marks correctly pointed out in the beginning of the fucking video, everywhere where the USSR existed. Because there was a lot of Turkic nations under the banner of the USSR at this point, and they are trying to, America, by way of Turkey, is trying to instill separatist movements and nationalist movements by training, supporting militia movements. They still literally exist inside of Russian boundaries to this day, as a matter of fact. And there is still some level of involvement from the Turkish government with even Xinjiang, all the way to, because it spans all the way to what would be considered East Turkestan, Xinjiang, under the Chinese nation state. Yeah. So all the way to Uyghurs, like these are all Turkic people. Remember, that's my mother's literal fucking last name before she married my father. So this is what is that sign? Hardly a serious fascist gesture, Lamau. I mean, it means different. The symbolism is important for Turkey. Obviously, it's laughable everywhere else. I even throw it up regularly.
Internationally, and the Grey Wolves would soon wreak havoc on left-wing activists. Naturally, whenever fascist paramilitaries are created, the eyes of the Yankee CIA defenders of democracy and freedom shine with excitement.
Then Jim Angleton appeared in August. He began recruiting fascists because he figured that the best way to control the communists was to hire fascists.
CIA officer Ray Klein said in an interview on Operation Gladio in Italy, quote, "It was not far-fetched that some in the 60s throughout Europe, and perhaps no activity of the CIA could be as clearly linked to the possibility of internal subversion." Mehtap Söyler explains in her book how Western powers used Operation Gladio to promote Turanism in Turkey through Alparslan Türkeş as a founding member of the counter-guerrilla. In 1965, a new intelligence agency was formed with the help of the CIA, the National Intelligence Board, MIT, not to be confused with this MIT. The MIT soon penetrated, quote,
To add some nuance, there was a serfdom in Turkey. The progressive left-leaning people were co-opted by the ultra-nationalist-led coup because the coup was against the feudal lords and Islamist Menderes. That makes the story in Turkey much more complex, yes.
The entire fabric.
And Turks still hold, Turks, as a consequence of ultra-nationalist sentiment, still hold a massive, massive amount of, pre-AKP, the way that the army was seen is like the protectorate of Turkish democracy, and still to this day, many Turks see it as such, and will criticize Erdogan for genuinely eviscerating the influence of the Turkish military in general. However, obviously, the Turkish military does, military shit all the time, but it does add a layer of complexity to the conversation for sure.
Of the Turkish society. Many MIT members and Grey Wolves, which one could barely distinguish at that point, would join the Gladio counter-guerrilla.
MIT is the Turkish CIA.
Counter-guerrilla were institutionally united, and from 1967 operated out of the secret CIA-sponsored Special Warfare Department in Ankara. The central goal of the department being, quote, "In the case of a communist occupation or of a rebellion, to use guerrilla methods and all possible underground activities to bring an end to the occupation." The CIA was so successful in creating a massive web of Turkish secret services, even MIT officers would acknowledge they were dependent on Washington. In 2008, a court document during the so-called Ergenekon trials revealed that the MIT had funded and armed members of the Grey Wolves in order to carry out political assassinations, such as against Kurdish or Armenian liberation fighters. Toward the end of the 60s, MIT members would also cooperate with the Israeli Mossad to murder Palestinians. In Turkey, another economic recession worsened the situation dramatically. At the end of the decade, social unrest intensified, labor strikes, student riots, political assassinations, and so on. Turkey had adopted 5-year plans in the 60s, not the socialist ones, but state-directed capitalist ones, to develop industry through import substitution. This led to rapid growth of the working class, going from 2.2 million wage earners to almost 4 million by 1970, including 600,000 women who previously worked in agriculture or at home. Due to the more liberal constitution of 1961, worker organizing was made easier, hence trade union membership tripled to 1 million throughout the 60s. The increased labor organizing caused headaches among industry leaders.
Yeah, even though the origination, or not the origination, but like the labor unions were supposed to be co-opted, obviously in times of economic volatility, instability, labor unions still were like, okay, well, we're going to do what we're supposed to do, and became more revolutionary as a consequence of the economic uncertainty. And therefore, this created yet another problem for the labor unions, or for another problem in the eyes of the Turkish government against the labor unions.
In February of 1969, during the so-called Bloody Sunday, tens of thousands of left-wing students and workers marched on Taksim Square in Istanbul to protest against the arrival of the US Sixth Fleet. Among the key leaders of that protest was a certain Deniz Gezmiş. More on him later.
Chad.
The Association for the Fight Against Communism had called for a counter-demonstration. During the rally, right-wing extremist groups, with the protection of law enforcement and with some of them controlled by the Turkish counter-guerrilla, attacked the protesting people with knives, chains, and sticks. 2 protesters were killed.
This is Bloody Sunday. That's crazy. Why would the police... What? How could this have happened?
And over 100 were injured, all under the eyes of the police, who merely attacked the left, but not their buddies from the right. The working class did not forget those who fell on Bloody Sunday. A year later, the state-affiliated Turkish Trade Union Confederation had requested an amendment to the trade union law which would have effectively led to the closure of the more left-wing Disk Union. After the amendment went into effect, unions called for protests on June 13. 20,000 people were expected, but when 150,000 workers took to the streets of Istanbul, even the trade union leadership was shocked. The most brutal police repression, all the tanks and gunshots, couldn't stop the protesters. Only a state of emergency, which...
Turkey is still significantly more radical in comparison to America, by the way. Like May Day, in my lifetime, even when I was growing up, May Day was like... May Day still to this day, I think. Maybe not to this day, but like... When I was growing up, May Day was a massive, massive fucking site of protest. Still. May 1st. Internationally, that is the real Labor Day, which is ironic considering that it comes from the United States of America, and yet we don't have it here. We have a different Labor Day in the United States of America than May Day.
Which was declared 3 days later, could bring this historic protest.
They suppressed May Day in Istanbul heavily this year. They didn't let people travel to Taksim. Yeah, nowadays you can't. Nowadays, they don't even let you do it, I guess.
To an end. It was this massive worker struggle in June of 1970, which is now
Class consciousness yok ama nedense TR'de işçiler May Day'i çok seviyor, haklarını biliyorlar.
Considered among the largest of organized labor in Turkey's history, which Kaypakaya considered to be, quote, proof that the objective conditions of the revolution have become mature in Turkey. The ruling classes concurred and interpreted the two-day workers' uprising as the beginning of a systemic crisis of Turkish capitalism. Something big needed to be done quickly to save the system from the wrath of the people. The social unrest would lead into another major coup in 1971.
Yeah, May Day is a celebration for what happened in Chicago. How dumb is that the USA doesn't celebrate it? Is it dumb? Or is it deliberate?
Ushering in one of the bloodiest decades of recent Turkish history, where thousands would die at the hands of CIA-assisted right-wing terror. At the beginning of 1971, Turkish society was in mayhem. Turkey's second coup was only a matter of time. Labor strikes exploded everywhere, universities stopped working, and young left-wing activists robbed banks, attacked US targets, and created urban guerrillas. The dominant party at the time was the Justice Party, a descendant of the Democrat Party of Menderes. The Justice Party's Süleyman Demirel, who had been elected in 1965 as Turkey's youngest prime minister, was overwhelmed with the chaos, and the military apparatus didn't like that. Chief of the General Staff, Memduh Tamaç, demanded a strong government which will, quote, neutralize the current anarchical situation. After Demirel's refusal to grant the military more political influence in the anti-uprising struggles, the generals had enough. The tanks were deployed, and Tamaç handed the prime minister a memorandum in March, meaning, either you resign or we'll depose you. Demirel, not having a real choice here, resigned, and the military leaders took over, exhibiting that
leftist robbing banks just makes you a Stalinist. They were fucking Maoists. They were Stalinists. They were these guys were real Marxist-Leninists, 100%.
In the modern state, the gun has the last word. But the chaos didn't stop. By the end of April, martial law was declared once more. Strikes and union meetings were prohibited. Thousands of people, communists, trade unionists, left-leaning academics, and journalists, faced harsh sentences and suffered systematic torture. Left publications were banned and confiscated. The fascist ones were left untouched, of course.
That's
After
weird.
the People's Liberation Army of Turkey, short PHKO, abducted an Israeli consul in May, The government escalated their ruthless repression. The 1961 constitution was regarded as too permissive of left ideologies and was amended.
That's so strange because you hear Erdogan and all these other like Turkish people as a population are obviously anti-Israel by incredibly wide margins. Turkish government, on the other hand, has oftentimes collaborated with the Israeli government and Israeli authorities and Israeli espionage agencies.
Meanwhile, the infamous Ziverbey Villa in Istanbul served as a torture center, where the CIA trained specialists and the Grey Wolves in the MIT anti-counterguerrilla interrogated countless people, employing physical and psychological torture. It's here where the term counterguerrilla was mentioned for the first time to anyone who wasn't a member. A well-known journalist who was tortured there later wrote that they told him, quote, "We are the counterguerrilla. Even the President of the Republic cannot touch us." As repression and the contradictions within Turkish society intensified, and due to events in France, Vietnam, or China, a new wave of organizations emerged, and its leaders had one immediate goal: revolution. The communist movement was seriously weakened. The revisionist parties who had ossified in the hopes of changing Turkey through democratic reforms were crushed themselves. It was the military crackdown, and importantly, the great...
This is why I always say, like, no matter what happens in all of these countries, they don't just, they're never only focused on like the MLs or, you know, vanguard revolutionary parties. It is always a section, both in Italy and in Western Europe in general, wherever NATO operated, they literally gutted every aspect of left-leaning organization. This is precisely the reason why the Cold War was so unimaginably successful for capitalists, and the reason why so many people in Europe literally are, and in America especially, are just terrified of the word socialism and think that it's like, it means, you know, awful, it means something bad. It's just it's basically like a pejorative. It doesn't stop. It, depending on where you are looking at, depending on what country you are looking at, it doesn't just stop at trade unionists either. Sometimes it means, like, if you're a part of any kind of women's rights group, for example. Counter-guerrilla has threatened the CHP leader Ecevit, a prime minister of Turkey. Yeah. 7 assassination attempts, including one on U.S. soil, mind you, when he said he would go after the counter-guerrilla and hold them accountable. There was an assassination attempt on his life. Not one, 7 total assassination attempts on his life, including one on American soil. Here, I wanted to show you this. Wait, hold on. Where the fuck did he go? Here. Bülent Ecevit was subject, or not 7, sorry. 6 assassination attempts. All but one occurred in the 1970s. 5 happened in Turkey and 1 on U.S. soil. The most famous of which took place on the 23rd of July, 1976 in New York City by a Greek Cypriot, and on the 29th of May, 1977 at Çiğli Airport. Mehmet İsvan, brother of the mayor of Istanbul, Ahmet İsvan, was injured in the attempt at Çiğli Airport. Various testimonies allege that the weapon used in the Çiğli Airport originated from the Special Warfare Department, Special Forces unit of the Turkish Army. Founded in 1952, formed out of the Army's Tactical Mobilization Group, Seferberlik Taktik Kurulu, and it was disbanded in 1992 with responsibility for special operations then taken over by the new Special Forces Command. They were also funded and trained by the USA. During the Cold War, the SWD cooperated closely with the CIA.
Great proletarian cultural revolution in China, which inspired a new upsurge in revolutionary organization. There were 3 notable organizations that were initiated by radical students in this period: the aforementioned THKO, the THKPC, and the Communist Party of Turkey, Marxist-Leninist, short TKP-ML. If you are confused, don't worry, because there were 100 other left-wing organizations in Turkey. But it's important to keep these 3 in mind, particularly the last one. Founded by Ibrahim Kaypakaya in 1972, It accepted Mao's contributions as a higher stage in the development of Marxism. The party would follow Marxism-Leninism-Maoism and the strategy of waging revolution through protracted people's war. Kaypakaya had been banned from his school for his political activism. He later went to study physics in Istanbul and became known as a great theorist and organizer in the student movement of the late 60s, which was partially inspired by the 1968 events in France. Kaypakaya had split from another organization due to their rightist line, such as their chauvinist position on the Kurdish people, paying lip service to their struggle for self-determination, but ultimately remaining vague.
Activity that asked the TAF leader at the time about the Special Warfare Department and what happens with the Ortulu Ordenal that the TAF receives. The TAF leader did not deny the existence of the organization and said all of the expenditures are for good reasons. This was before the assassination attempts.
Or straight up opposing the formation of a separate Kurdish state. As one of the few original theoreticians of socialism in Turkey, Kaypakaya made fundamental theoretical contributions already at age 22. A leader from his former organization even assigned someone to go kill him, but that someone turned out to be a sympathizer of Kaypakaya and didn't do it. Kaypakaya stressed that the struggle against revisionism was essential in the fight against capitalism, not least because of how deep Turkish chauvinism penetrated the broader left in Turkey, and how it would hold the proletariat back from forming genuine unity among different nationalities and from developing revolutionary consciousness. To this day, Kemalism is a big problem within the so-called Turkish left, much in the same way chauvinism and opportunism plague the left in other countries. The Turkish left is known especially for being fractured into 1,000 pieces. And let's remember here that wrecking and splitting the left, or disseminating ideas to pacify it with the establishment, are still two key tools of the CIA and their counter-subversion partners around the world. Many among the Turkish left would rely on hopes to find help from progressive officers in the military, cozying up to a supposed anti-imperialist trend within the CHP, instead of formulating a definite, independent path toward revolution, breaking with bourgeois illusions, reformism, and Kemalism. Kaypakaya and the TKPML created the Liberation Army of the Workers and Peasants of Turkey, short TIKO, which formed guerrilla units in Dersim at first, now renamed to Tunceli by the Turkish state, where the aforementioned Dersim genocide took place, and which Kaypakaya considered as having the best conditions to start a revolutionary movement. The National Intelligence Organization, or the MIT, concluded in a report, quote, "Within the communist movement in Turkey, Ibrahim Kaypakaya's ideas are the..."
Do you think there's more of a chance of a communist revolution in Turkey, though? It seems like there's more revolutionaries over there than here. No. Fuck no. I don't think you guys understand, dude. Turkey's nationalism is not even... America, in many respects, doesn't have to have such strong nationalist opinions because America and its allegiance is more towards capitalism than any kind of like national boundary. In Turkey, on the other hand, nationalism is on an entirely different spectrum. It's like, that's why I always say, like, I understand the way that, like, that's why I always say that I understand why, like, Israel operates in the way that it does.
Most dangerous. The views he presents in his writings and the methods of struggle he advocates are, as we can safely say, the application of revolutionary communism to Turkey. The Turkish state knew what needed to be done with the utmost urgency. Kaypakaya had to be eliminated.
Bro, you said, is there a revolutionary potential for Turkey? Motherfucker, let me tell you something, okay? Turkish people do not even operate within the confines of a fucking bourgeois liberal democracy in the ways that are basically protective of oneself. As in, there's still a popular movement for AKP that is only shaken, that only took a massive blow this past election cycle and still were able to maintain the majority. So you're out of your fucking mind. These motherfuckers won't even vote for the CHP coalition. You know what I mean? And that isn't even necessarily like a socialist one, obviously. That's not even a revolutionary one. That is literally a liberal one that is... Yeah, there was a huge potential for revolution. It's just that everybody got hanged, including, you know, this guy who, I don't know. It's just you're telling me to take my glasses off. I don't think we.
Among the most important
that
student leaders
similar,
at the time was the Kurdish Deniz Gezmiş, a founding member of the THKO, considered by many as Turkey's Che Guevara. He was repeatedly arrested and injured during his political activism. After Gezmiş managed to escape from the hospital while under surveillance, he traveled to the Palestine Liberation Organization camps in Jordan to undergo guerrilla training. He and other THKO members were arrested after robbing 2 banks and kidnapping 4 US soldiers in Ankara. Gezmiş and 17 others were sentenced to death in October of 1971. The sentence was presented to the parliament in 1972 and it was overwhelmingly approved. Alparslan Türkeş was among those who voted in favor of the death sentence. But his comrades would not give him up without putting up a fight. Among them, self-described anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninist, firm supporter of Stalin and admirer of Che Guevara, Mahir Çayan, the leader of the THK-PC. In order to demand the freedom of Deniz Gezmiş and his comrades and to prevent their execution, Çayan and 10 accomplices abducted 3 NATO technicians. But in March 1972, in the Kızıldere massacre, the group...
By the way, here's a fun little passive voice moment right here. 10 anarşist ölü olarak ele geçti, which directly translates to 10 anarchists captured, found dead, basically, okay? As in, like, passive voiced. They're passive voicing this. Anarşistler ölmeden önce 3 İngiliz'i beyinlerine kurşun sıkıp öldürdü. The only time where there's active voice here is anarchists, before they died, who knows how they died, took 3 British and used lead, like it's a colloquial term for like kurşun sıkıp, which means like put lead in the brains of the 3 British. The anarchists died. They not only murdered the 3 British people, but are literally saying like they put lead in their brains, okay? Which is crazy.
Technicians.
Your Turkish is pretty good for an American. Ne diyor lan bu gerizekalı bana?
But in March 1972, in the Kızıldere massacre, the group was spotted and surrounded by soldiers later revealed to be the Gladio counter-guerrilla forces. And in the resulting gunfire, almost everyone present, including the hostages, was killed. Çayan died at age 26. The operation was led by Fehmi Altınbilik, member of the counter-guerrilla through the Special Warfare Department. It's not the last time Fehmi would play a key role in the assault on revolutionaries. A month later, the president ordered the execution of 25-year-old Gezmiş and his comrades. Before he was executed by hanging on May 6th in 1972, he requested to drink tea and listen to Joaquín Rodrigo's Concierto de Aranjuez. His last words were, "Long live a fully independent Turkey. Long live the great ideology of Marxism-Leninism. Long live the Turkish and Kurdish people's fight for independence. Damned be imperialism. Long live the workers and the villagers." After the destruction of the guerrillas of Gezmiş and Çayan, the state now focused its forces on Kaypakayastiko. As opposed to Çayan's approach, which foresaw guerrilla units forming in the cities first before expanding into the countryside, the TKPML started in the rural areas. Aside from that, there were other differences between their strategies: Çayan's politicized military war strategy, or PAS, and the protracted People's War of the TKPML. But this examination will be part of another video on Marxist military theory. The THKO of Gezmiş followed an approach closer to the FOCO theory going back to Che Guevara, and later further popularized by French writer Régis Debray, which put the guerrilla unit at the center of revolutionary change. Guerrillas were key for the TKPML as well. However, as the People's War strategy prescribed, the guerrilla is subordinate to the party. The goal is to ground the People's Army on the population's mass support. Politics is in command of the rifle, so to speak. So, Kaypakaya and his comrades, among them the Kurdish communist Ali Haydar Yıldız, went to the villages in Dersim, doing research on the terrain and the class composition in the
other reason why like communism is broadly seen as like an awful movement is because in Turkey, a lot of the communists, a lot of the socialists were directly Kurdish, of Kurdish lineage, and played significant roles in like emancipatory movements for Kurds. and therefore are like automatically branded terrorists from that front as well, because there was also it was also synonymous with an ethnic movement as well. So that's the other, like, ethnic separatist movement as well. So that's the other reason.
Towns organized actions against big landlords who tyrannized people, helping villagers with their agricultural work, knocking on doors and listening to their problems. This worked very well. Kaypakaya was well liked by the villagers. The Turkish forces knew about these young revolutionaries going around from town to town spreading their dangerous ideology, and the military commando launched a plan to move into the Dersim villages. Understanding these strategies and nip them in the bud was key for the CIA anti-counter-guerrilla. Vietnam had just shown them that it's not always the bigger military force which prevails. It's not easy for the superior military to fight against the People's War strategy, since it's very tough to beat an army that is directly supported by the surrounding population politically, as analyzed by the RAND Corporation, a US national security think tank. One tactic of the military personnel was to disguise themselves as revolutionaries and to knock on doors. If the villagers sympathized with them, they knew whom to keep an eye on and whom to terrorize. But fortunately for Kaypakaya and Ali Haydar, the families hid them very well at their places. The police and military terror against the population increased. Torture and beatings became part of everyday life in Dersim, even becoming a major issue in the Turkish parliament. The region was virtually surrounded by the military commandos. Head of the commando, the aforementioned counter-guerrilla member, Fehmi, who led the operation that killed Mahir Jayan. One early morning in January 1973 in a nearby village, but this time he was unlucky. He asked someone for directions, but the village resident was shocked at Kaypakaya's condition and took him back to their home. They notified a village teacher, but unfortunately, this teacher happened to be a reactionary. The region's mission command had already established contact with him, and he knew very well who Kaypakaya was. The military forces got wind of Kaypakaya's whereabouts and surrounded the village. The head of the command, Lieutenant Fehmi, ripped open the door and yelled, quote, "You are Ibrahim Kaypakaya, aren't you?" "If you know, why are you asking?" replied Kaypakaya in a razor-sharp voice. Then he was asked how he had escaped, Fehmi not being able to cope with the fact that he had slipped through his fingers. "I clenched my teeth and fled, as is necessary to escape such fascists as you," replied Kaypakaya. Despite being brutally tortured every day for over 3 months, he did not reveal any information about the TKPML's internal organization or the identities of his comrades or villagers who helped him.
Bestie Marx talks about Turkish socialism like it's only militant activism. There was a civil movement too, which was targeted by the Grey Wolves. He hasn't mentioned the Workers' Party or anything. Yeah, there's it wasn't just guerrilla movements. Like there was a civil side, there was a civil front as well, which in the cities were duking it out with these fascist paramilitaries. Which was of course just as important. That collaboration extended. American fascism and like American aligned fascists would literally kill you in the fucking streets. And no repercussions whatsoever. No repercussions whatsoever. They had literally nothing. Like fascists could just come. They would cut your fucking hair in the streets if they thought your hair was long. It extended beyond that. Like it literally, it extended beyond just like someone who's a communist or whatever, but like suspected communists. People that they thought were hippies or socialists because they had long hair would have fascist paramilitaries in the streets literally fucking hold you down and cut your hair.
Were thus wiped out by 1973, a huge win for the fascist state. As the counter-guerrilla continued to rapidly expand its operations, a new prime minister was elected in 1974, Bülent Ecevit of the CHP, who would soon order the invasion of Cyprus. In the same year, he said he was shocked to notice that there was a US-financed clandestine force operating in Turkey. The Turkish army general cautioned him against delving too deeply into the matter, as it pertained to the greatest state secrets. But Ecevit's suspicions proved to be utterly correct. I hope you're still here. Take a deep breath, because now we're gonna look at the most brutal sequence of years covered in this video. Considering the events in the early 70s, it's hard to believe that it got much worse toward the latter half of the decade. a period which many people describe as a civil war. In 1975, the Justice Party's Süleyman Demirel succeeded Ecevit as president. Remember that he was the guy who got couped in 1971. He now led a coalition with various right-wing parties, including Alparslan Türkeş's far-right MHP. The MHP now managed to infiltrate state security services directly, increasing the strength of the fascist death squads and exacerbating the ongoing repression of left-wingers. The coalition implemented so-called neoliberal policies, going along with many of the capitalist governments in the 70s. This did not exactly calm down the furious masses, as it further deepened the crisis. The government looked anything but stable. In these years, prime ministers switched more quickly than managers at Chelsea Football Club. Turkey had 10 different PMs in the 70s. But one thing remained stable and constant: the so-called deep state of Turkey, along with its CIA assistants.
This is really important. Deep state, derin devlet, is actually a Turkish invention, or the term itself is invented in Turkey. And it's really ironic because the deep state is I guess something that has been bastardized in America, and it's this notion that, like, I guess like some evil guys are trying to do woke and gay stuff. Like, that's what Americans think it is. But the deep state is basically just the American State Department enforcing its will through a parallel governmental structure, sometimes by way of fascist paramilitaries. But ultimately, it is a reinforcement mechanism of capitalism. You don't have a need for a deep state if your state is already capitalist. So in America, there is no fucking deep state because it's just the state, technically.
And its fascist militia detachments. The modern concept of the deep state is in fact something that predominantly came from an understanding of the secret network of military officers and their civilian partners in Turkey, and the involvement of the counter-guerrilla structure in the fight against communism. But the so-called deep state is nothing particularly spectacular. It just refers to the state bureaucracy which isn't visible to the public and which is an essential feature of any capitalist state apparatus. Liberals like to downplay this or frame it as a conspiracy theory in order to salvage the image of liberal democracy. But there is no conspiracy. It's just what's reproduced within capitalist class society. The modern state needs a stable bureaucracy in foreign policy, national security, lobbyists and corrupt officials tied to the private sector through 1,000 threads, through which it can systematically guard the interests of the wealthy. This is just what the bourgeois state is supposed to do. In 1976, a certain Recep Tayyip Erdogan entered politics by joining an anti-communist action group, the National Turkish Student Union, one of many right-wing organizations emerging at the time, who were soon to meet an opportunity to lash out in a big way. On International Workers' Day in 1977, over 500,000 protesters gathered at the Taksim Square in Istanbul. And then, all of a sudden, some people opened fire on the crowd. Masked snipers shot people from nearby buildings, such as the Intercontinental Hotel. The massive crowd panicked. The shooting lasted for about 20 minutes. Around 40 people were killed and about 200 injured. Over 500 protesters were detained by the police. During the whole 20 minutes, thousands of police officers who were on the scene just stood there and did not intervene. Who started the shooting? Opposition leader Bülent Ecevit suspected it was the counter-guerrilla. Quote, "Some organizations and forces within the state, but outside the control of the democratic state of law, have to be taken under control without losing time. The counter-guerrilla is running an offensive and has a finger in the May 1st incident."
This is like a real fucking I'm gonna blow up the CIA to 1,000 pieces moment. And it's not like Ecevit is like a revolutionary figure in and of itself. Neither was JFK, of course. But, you know, it's just so weird. There's always like, I don't know. There's always just some chaos occurring, and it turns bloody, and then the police automatically defend the fascists because it's a conspiracy. This isn't a conspiracy. These guys were the counter-guerrilla, the counter-guerrillas were literally directly funded and trained by the CIA and the snipers that were fucking shooting from the Intercontinental Hotel, which was suspiciously empty slash, you know, American owned, happened to be a staging ground for them. I don't know how that happened. The conspiracy in and of itself is that is basically that they conspired. Not that there was a conspiracy theory, that they conspired. They worked with the American government directly.
Leaders of trade unions stated that this was clearly a plan of the CIA. One of them said that there were Americans in the Intercontinental Hotel and that the hotel had been closed to the public on that day. 3 days before the incident, it was allegedly emptied and had stopped taking reservations. The hotel was owned by the ITT Corporation, which had close connections to the CIA and that had been involved in financing the coup against Salvador Allende in 1973 in Chile. According to a Turkish magazine, the MIT deputy chief was present on the day of the massacre. Ankara's deputy state attorney, Doğan Öz, concluded in his final report that the, quote, military and civilian security services are behind all this work. The counter-guerrilla are subordinate to the Special Warfare Department. Shortly after releasing his report, Öz was assassinated. His killer, well-known member of the Grey Wolves, Ibrahim Çiftçi, who mocked the courts for not being able to touch him. He was right. Çiftçi was set free even after he confessed to the crime. He is now an official member of the MHP. Look at this guy's Twitter profile, looking healthy and fine.
Wait, what? How'd that happen? You mean to tell me that a fucking fascist hitman is still very much in operation in the Turkish government and is like a famous fucking, well, you know, is just like a normal fucking MHP, ultra-nationalist fascist party member? What? How the fuck did that happen, dude? That's so weird. Do you now understand why I say America or Turkey is a dog to the American state? This is why I say it. Okay?
As if nothing ever happened. The Turkish state, of course, denied any involvement of the CIA and in the usual, most ridiculous manner, even blamed the left for the killings. Not a single perpetrator of the May Day massacre.
Oh, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Turkish politics, I just need to mention something here as well, by the way. At the top of the hour, there's a 3-minute ad break, okay? Turks will not see it. We don't serve ads in Turkey for the most part, I don't think. Americans will, however. If you no longer want to see those ads, all you need to do is subscribe for $5 or for free with a Twitch Prime. One more thing. Here's the 3-minute ad break now. One more thing. The AKP formed a governing coalition with the MHP under the leadership of Bahçeli. And he is, like that is a still, the current governing coalition is the MHP and the AKP. So it's nationalists and the Islamists. Well, not full-blown Islamists, but, you know, the populist fake fundies. There's like way more Islamist parties out there too, but
was ever caught and brought to justice. But this was just the beginning to all the massacres that followed in the next few years. Such as the Beyazıt massacre of 1978 at the University of Istanbul, perpetrated by the Grey Wolves, in which 7 students were killed. Witnesses stated that the police didn't do anything against the perpetrators at the scene. The leader of the Istanbul Grey Wolves, and one of those responsible, was sentenced to prison for 11 years, but was released again 2 years later. After the 30-year statute of limitations expired, the mother of a shooter admitted that her son was involved and that he had been ordered by the police to commit the massacre. A few months later in the same year, another 7 university students in Ankara were brutally murdered by the Grey Wolves in the Bahçelievler massacre. Grey Wolves leader, Abdullah Çatlı, the drugs dealer and friend of the Istanbul police chief I mentioned at the beginning, was a key person involved in those killings. Çatlı was being paid by the MIT at the time in heroin. And then, in December 1978, the Grey Wolves would commit its most vicious massacre of the 70s. In Maraş, a region which was hit especially hard in the 2023 earthquakes, more than 100 Alevi Kurds and left-wingers were murdered primarily by the fascists. About 5,000 people lost their lives in the 1970s. Communists, trade unionists, intellectuals, workers, or their family members, most of them at the hands of the far right. That's about 10 murders per day. Over 3,300 fascist attacks were counted in 1978 alone. The people of Turkey and Kurdistan will never forget this decade. At the end of the 70s, Supreme Court Justice Emin Değer documented evidence of cooperation between the Grey Wolves, the anti-counter-guerrilla, showing how the counter-guerrilla organization distributed weapons to various right-wing terrorist groups. The Turkish Minister of Foreign Affairs in the late 70s said, quote, "The CIA is able to pick and choose in my intelligence service without let or hindrance." Following the Maraş massacre, the state once again declared martial law in 14 provinces. Many more people would die due to fascist attacks, such as at prominent cafes in Istanbul, frequented by leftists. Ultimately, no matter how much they tried, no matter how many communists they killed and tortured, the state-supported fascists couldn't erase the light of the quickly growing revolutionary disposition of the masses. The ruling class had no other option than to resort to yet another military coup to restore quote-unquote law and order and smash the left in Turkey once and for all. The economic crisis in Turkey worsened dramatically as oil prices skyrocketed, bringing inflation to 3 digits. The balance between Ecevit's CHP and Demirel's Justice Party proved not dictatorial enough to put an end to the chaos in Turkey. So, the military generals met in 1979 to make a plan for another coup, using the pretext of restoring political unity. The most important military leader and organizer of the coup was a man called Kenan Evren. At the time of the coup in September 1980, Evren had been head of a certain organization. You guessed it. He was the chief of the Special Warfare Department and commander of the counter-guerrilla secret army. Evren had excellent relations with the US. In 1978, he had met with National Security Counsel Zbigniew Brzezinski, who allegedly told him that the coup was a good idea, since the US needed a stable Turkey. Quote, "For Turkey, as for Brazil, a military government would be the best solution." In his memoirs, Evren wrote that Demirel asked him to engage the Special Warfare Department to deal with the unrest. Evren also calmed the fears of Ecevit by allegedly telling him, quote, "There is nothing to..."
By the way, Zbigniew Brzezinski, famously Mika Brzezinski's dad, Mika, who is married to Joe in Morning Joe. Also a bit of a yapper who openly admitted that he goaded Islamist fundamentalist movements in Afghanistan against the communist government of Afghanistan that was like aligned with the USSR. This isn't a defense of the Afghan government, mind you. I'm just, telling you how it is. And very openly flexed about it. And pre 9/11 famously told a French magazine or a French newspaper when asked, don't you think it's a problem to like arm and train a lot of these Islamist fundamentalists? To which he said, excuse me, what do you think is scarier, communism or a bunch of fucking Islamist fundamentalists with weapons? Post 9/11, he, I think, probably has a different opinion, but I guess America never lets a crisis go to waste. They fucking loved 9/11 too. They did a phenomenal job in advancing American interests post 9/11 too. So I guess, it kind of worked out well in the end for everybody.
Worry about. We will deal with it. In the late night of September 12, 1980, the armed forces began sending tanks to Ankara, occupying television, radio, and party buildings. Evren announced martial law and all political parties were banned. Strikes were prohibited, local governors were replaced by military personnel, leaving the country was made illegal, and 50 people were immediately executed. Within a short period of time, more than 500,000 people were detained, many of them tortured, and 1.7 million people were blacklisted. Many communist leaders were captured, then tortured, then murdered, such as Kurdish communist and second general secretary of the DKPML after Kaypakaya, Süleyman G.
By the way, do you get why? Like, someone was asking, like, so what's up with the communist movement in Turkey? Yeah, this is what's up. At this point, it's fucking Jover.
The police claimed he committed suicide, but an autopsy pretty much confirmed he was murdered and then thrown from the 6th floor. The repression against Kurdish people escalated. The Kurdish language was banned, those who spoke or sang in Kurdish were imprisoned, and in November 1978, in the province of Diyarbakir,
This is where like the communist movement fully forms into like an ethnic struggle in the eyes of the broader Turkish population.
Kurdistan Workers' Party, short PKK, was founded, initially with a Marxist-Leninist orientation to bring about a Kurdish state through a revolution. But there was also an ideological assault on communism, not just through the assassination of its brightest leaders, but also through the conscious attempt to rid Turkey of its working-class consciousness, such as renaming a left-wing stronghold in Istanbul from 1st of May neighborhood to Mustafa Kemal neighborhood. A man called Paul Hentze was the CIA station chief in Turkey at the time, and one of the best friends of Alparslan Türkeş. He encouraged Brzezinski to form the Nationalities Working Group, which promoted the use of Islamism as a means to challenge Soviet ideology in Central Asia. Think about this sort of stuff the next time someone says that the West promotes secular values in the world. Paul Hentze would...
So here's the other aspect of this. So this is like at the same time. This is happening at the same time as like we're targeting Wahhabis. We're beefing up Wahhabist prominence and Wahhabist influence in other parts, in other regions. And then that kind of Islamist fundamentalism becomes too damaging in our century. So America goes, oh, what can we do? We can promote a more tolerant Islamism. Fethullah Gülen is what America or the American State Department thought, in the most laughable ways possible, is the counterbalance to the scarier Salafists or the scarier Wahhabist movements that you saw become, in certain instances, too problematic for America to continue aligning with. That is ironically where the Fethullah Gülen attitude comes from. Like, that's where Fethullah Gülen and support for Fethullah Gülen comes from as far as the American State Department goes, as far as the CIA goes.
Later say something interesting in an interview about the coup.
Ulusal Güvenlik Konseyi'nden bir meslek memurunun beni aradığını hatırlıyorum. Ankara'daki çocuklar yaptılar gibi bir şey söyledi.
The working class was also assaulted in the economic sphere, under the pretext of, quote, revitalizing the economy. The head of the central bank was forcibly replaced because he was against the IMF, in order to complete the subjugation of Turkey to the global capitalist system, allowing foreign capital to pour in without any control, privatizing whatever could be privatized, making Turkey even more export dependent, thus giving multinational corporations ultimate free reign. The banker's press was more enthusiastic.
Erdogan, by the way, also suspiciously advanced that completely. Like, the major reforms that he put in place, economic reforms that he put in place, were literally at the behest of this exact same interest. Some to remember, this is forcible extraction this is creating, yes, dollar dependency, forcible extraction of whatever natural resource the country has, including its labor force, and putting you in a debtor's prison, basically, and forcing you to implement austerity measures every now and then. And here it is. This was the real interest of the West. Now, you might recognize that this is kind of how it goes everywhere that America or the Western world has interest in. You might even recognize that what is going on in Ukraine is of similar interest. Turkey had a lot of state-owned industry. All of it was, over the course of many decades, privatized.
Than ever before during this time. Coup leader Kenan Evren was now president of Turkey. Hundreds of laws were pushed through, such as guaranteeing impunity for the military junta leaders or to discipline society militarily, and a new constitution was put in place. However, While the military dictatorship proved to be an effective beast in suppressing the rapidly rising revolutionary sentiment with the utmost brutality, it ultimately failed in silencing the fierce resistance and breaking it completely. Enough was enough. In 1984, the PKK had announced a full-scale uprising and declared war on the Turkish state. After having played a key role in instigating the 1980 coup, Alparslan Türkeş was imprisoned by the High Command, and a general within the army even pushed for his execution by a firing squad. The aforementioned fascist employed by the CIA, Ruzi Nazar, intervened, and Türkeş was spared. Following the coup, in an attempt to distance itself from the collaboration with the far right...
How much of this do they teach in school? Wait, nothing, bro. What are you talking about? In Turkish school? Absolutely none of this is taught. What the fuck? Are you crazy? No, none of this shit is taught in Turkish school, bro. Are you kidding me? Abso-fucking-lutely not. Also, as far as like the revolutionary potential of the PKK goes, it's not. It's gone. It's done. At this stage, as it exists currently, none of the major like guerrilla movements in Turkey are still foundationally or fundamentally revolutionary or Marxist-Leninist, and have basically turned into a less offensive version in the eyes of at least both fascists and capital owners, which is simply a nationalist or separatist movement. A similar prospect exists for Hamas as well. If you look at Palestinian liberation, and by the way, I'm not making a comparison to the treatment of Kurds under the Turkish government to the treatment of Palestinians under the Israeli occupation. Those are in two different planets. There's still a shit ton of injustice that Kurds face in Turkey, but it's not even remotely close. And I've often said, and I've made comparisons to like the American Black Liberation Movement, for example. If the Palestinians had the same like material conditions that black people face in America right now, it would be seen as an objective improvement, like a dramatic improvement, an unimaginable improvement. Same goes for like if the Palestinians basically were, if the Palestinians were integrated into Israeli society, and that they were treated like the Kurds are treated across the board in Turkey, they would literally, it would be considered world peace. Everyone would be fucking, everyone would be celebrating the accomplishment. Yes, Kurds are still Turkish citizens. Yes, Kurds are 35 million people in the Middle East that are a massive ethnic minority in every fucking country that they're in. Iraq, Syria, parts of Iran. That entire region has a total of 35 million ethnic Kurds that do not have a state. They just have never had a state. And Armenia too, yes. And basically, there are separatist movements. There were obviously a lot of revolutionary socialist movements among the Kurdish population. There are still some revolutionary movements in the Kurdish population, in Rojava, for example. But ultimately, as I've said before, unfortunately, many of the Kurdish militias have turned into just simple weapons that America utilizes whenever they see fit. This is the unfortunate reality of all revolutionary movement. America first destroys the revolutionary potential, and then America first destroys the revolutionary potential of these actual ideologically committed movements by using fascists as fucking as cannon fodder, and just like kills them directly, and then turns around and uses whatever remains sometimes as a militia that they train, including but not limited to friend of the show, YPJ's brave warrior, Brace Belden. Like, he has talked about how, you know, American trainers were training the Kurdish militias in Syria.
A couple hundred grave.
Do I think Kurdistan should exist? Yes, I do. I am a believer that Kurdistan should exist. I believe that in order to maintain regional security, Kurdish people having autonomy and having a nation state would be just. I think that the only way to do that, however, without American intervention or involvement, so it doesn't turn into a fucking Israel-style situation, which it never really will, because like Kurds are unfortunately not exactly present in the diaspora in America. There isn't that same like kind of connection that America has developed with Israel, considering that it fucking made Israel into what it is. The fears, from my point of view, would be that it would be an American puppet state. The only way to develop a Kurdish nation state in that regard would be to go back to the same oppressive people who have slaughtered Kurds, including the Turkish government, not limited to the Turkish government, and try to create some sort of regional cooperation and develop a nation state for the Kurds. Having said that, however, I don't think that that will happen, at least in my lifetime. I don't see that happening.
Wolves out of the 200,000 registered members were imprisoned. But now they were needed again in the escalating fight against the PKK. MIT members went to the prisons to make an attractive deal. In return for setting the Grey Wolves free and guaranteed income, they would help them fight against the Kurds. In the following fight against the PKK, tens of thousands of people died, while millions of Kurds were displaced from Turkey or Turkish Kurdistan. The counter-guerrilla would use one of its favorite tricks, which was to dress up as the enemy, in this case as PKK fighters, attack villages and commit abuse or executions in an attempt to weaken support for the enemy. Mosques were built in Alevi regions in order to replace Alevism with Sunni Islam. Kurdish language, political organizations, and newspapers, or the Newroz New Year celebrations were banned. The Kurdish identity was to be eliminated once and for all with the help of the counter-guerrilla and American helicopters, jets, and guns. In the usual hypocritical manner of the liberals, Bill Clinton would later state that, quote, Turkey is a shining example to the world of the virtues of cultural diversity, while sending arms to kill Kurds. One among many notable Kurdish fighters was member of the PKK Central Committee, Mazlum Doğan. Doğan had been imprisoned in 1979, and then, on March 21st in 1982, at the age of 27, Mazlum Doğan protested against the Turkish government's repression of Kurds and use of torture in prisons by setting himself on fire, through burning his prison cell and subsequently hanging himself. His act coincided with the Newroz festival, an important celebration among Kurds, during which Newroz fires are traditionally lit. Doğan's actions marked the beginning of a series of hunger strikes and resistance actions by political prisoners in 1982. Doğan's legacy has been honored by many Kurdish activists, and he's become a symbol of the Kurdish resistance. This video is already long, but keep in mind that only a fraction of what really occurred was covered here. I nonetheless hope this gave you a general idea of what occurred, and I encourage you to read the analyses of Turkish and Kurdish Marxists, such as the selected works of Kaypakaya I have listed in the description. At this point, it is important to know that the anti-communist clandestine structures have not gone away. And why would they? The struggle against progressive ideas necessitates secrecy and the help of the most violent, reliable detachments of the capitalist ruling class, the Fascists. Secrecy is crucial, otherwise the general population might sympathize too much with the people who fight against the most reactionary elements of society which are allied with the state. The Social Democrats of Germany, for instance, would muddy the waters for decades about their collaboration with the only reliable force in their crushing of the German communists in the German Revolution, the Freikorps, which then built the basis for the Nazi movement. The secrecy of Western interference through Gladio in Turkey was also perhaps an important factor in boosting the influence of pseudo-left Kemalism, since many on the so-called left underestimated the degree of counter-revolutionary power which was embedded within the state apparatus. Despite its genocidal chauvinist positions, Turkey's MHP is to this day a powerful political force.
Yep.
The MHP had secured President Erdogan's re-election through its alliance with his party in 2018. Connections between Erdogan's party and the Grey Wolves are abundant, which is no big shock since Erdogan's administration is genocidal and chauvinist itself. Erdogan himself, coming from the fascist anti-left uprising tradition, being a member of one of many anti-communist organizations in the 70s.
One of the funniest ironies is that Recep Tayyip Erdogan is notorious free speech, which doesn't exist in America. It's not like, I mean, in Turkey, same shit. But he literally went to fucking jail for reading a poem and like technically inciting a riot for demonstrating anti-Kemalist sentiment, only to fucking become the leader one day, this goddamn watermelon salesman, and then turning around and fucking suppressing speech even further, way more than anyone else at this point.
Supported by the US. The Grey Wolves not only exert great influence in Turkey today, with more than 18,500 members nationwide, it constitutes the largest far-right organization in Germany. In Germany, too, the Grey Wolves are not only tolerated, but their presence was actively encouraged by German right-wing politicians so that they could terrorize the left in Germany as well, while the activities of several Turkish or Kurdish radical left organizations is prohibited. When Alparslan Türkeş died peacefully from heart failure at the age of 80 in 1997, his funeral is said to have been attended by 500,000 people. Kılıçdaroğlu himself has formed an alliance with the İYİ party, which is itself reactionary and which was formed as a result of a split from the fascist MHP.
Yeah.
And as I hope to show...
He is the woke liberal ultra-nationalist. İyi means good, by the way, in Turkish. This is Anıtkabir. It is kind of goated, I'm not going to lie. Maybe it's the Ankara or the Turk in me. But this is the mausoleum of Atatürk. And you go there and you pay respects to the founding father. It's kind of cool. It is pretty cool. I don't know. I wish we had more shit like this in America. You know what I mean? I thought you hated brutalism. I do like this kind of shit, like mausoleums and things like that. I do appreciate it. I'm not like one of those no fun leftists in the sense that it's like, oh, this is actually instilling reactionary opinions by creating a cult of personality around a militant person who was like engaging in a bourgeois revolution and you know, suppressed communism in the country, blah, blah, blah, blah, blah. Who cares, bro? It's cool. It looks cool. Shut the fuck up. I don't know why I don't feel the same level of like I don't feel the same level of longing or same perspective about DC monuments. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just because like that is my least American value. I don't feel that way, but I do want to see like where Lenin is. You know what I mean? I think that's sick. The communist countries apparently, and I did not know this, I talked to Alexa about this, have a tradition of not cremating and specifically embalming their dead leaders, including Ho Chi Minh and Lenin, and I believe maybe even Mao. Is Mao also embalmed? That's kind of sick. It's a little weird, but also kind of sick. I go to a K through 12 charter school run by Turkish people who allegedly have ties to Gülenist, and our middle school principal was investigated and found to have ties with Turkish Gülenist. I hear that there are more schools like that and visited one part as a Turkish dance comp I was in. Do you know about any of this? What are Gülenists? Yes, it most likely is a Gülenist. If it's a Turkish charter school, it most likely is a Gülenist operation, 100%. Bestie Marx fails to mention the civil Kurdish liberation movements that existed within the left before even PKK existed. Not having a distinct civil liberation movement makes Kurdish people securing their rights very hard and keeps the reactionaries in power, which is deliberately done by the deep state too, in my opinion. No, it's not dissimilar to the way Hamas is used as a political tool by the Israeli state to be like, oh yeah, look, see, all Palestinians are like this. The distinction there, however, is that there is Kurdish liberation movements within civil society and also active Kurdish parties within that aren't getting fucking arrested left and right, of course, by claims that they have deep ties to the PKK and whatever. But yeah. In any case,
show
this is a
Kemalism is not
long
exactly
story,
a positive force for minority.
but basically scratches the surface of my anger and resentment towards NATO and America in general.
And the proper left in Turkey. Turkish fascism has not gone away. To the contrary, its roots have grown deep into society, watered and consciously fostered by US imperialism. Following Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti's revelations about the secret NATO army, the public pressure became too great, and in December of 1990, President of the Operations Department and the head of the Turkish Special Forces issued a press statement in response to public pressure, acknowledging the presence of secret NATO troops in Turkey and explaining that the Special Warfare Department was responsible for directing the counter-guerrilla unit with the objective, quote, to organize resistance in the case of a communist occupation. They made sure to emphasize that all members of the Turkish Gladio were, quote, patriots. Those patriots were once again important in the escalating fight against the PKK in the 90s. In 1993, a parliamentary commission conducted an investigation on the counter-guerrilla, but the Speaker of the Parliament at the time was immediately contacted by a general to stop the investigation, and the State Security Court prosecutor ordered the police not to collaborate with the parliamentary commission in their investigation efforts. In the late 90s, in the Susurluk scandal aftermath, a report concluded that, quote, an execution squad was formed within the state, and that, quote, all parts of the state were aware of what was going on. The Human Rights Association concluded that there are, quote, around 3,500 crimes of the counter-guerrilla, which have been committed with the support of the state and which are covered up until today by the state. The president of that association, Akın Birdal, was then shot by Turkish nationalists and just barely survived.
Here's the other aspect of it that makes me going back to Turkey a little bit more scary potentially, is that people just suspiciously and mysteriously get killed by a fucking nationalist left and right. I don't know how it happens, but I'm not saying it's American involvement or deep state involvement, but it just always happened to be that way. It's weird, bro. It's weird as fuck. I don't know how. I don't know why. But any motherfucker that talks about this shit gets straight up murked by some fucking right-wing fascist dude. I don't know how. I don't know why. But it is definitely a thing that happens. Şimdi daha çok Silivri'ye yolluyorlar. Yeah, that's the other aspect of it. Then you have the overt government suppression. Would Cenk have just as much of a risk heading to Turkey? Fuck no. So what you're saying is I shouldn't go to Turkey? No, you guys are all fine. You're not Turkish. What the fuck are you talking about? Turkey is unimaginably fun for tourists. You're out of your mind if you think that anything bad is going to happen to you. No, Turkey is perfectly fine. Carter went. And yeah, Central Committee went with Carter. Y'all are so funny, dude. Go get your fucking hairline fixed. Do whatever you want to do. You're going to be fine. It's not going to hurt you. It'll be a little different if you're Turkish yourself.
Survived. In 1997, millions of people throughout Turkey switched off their lights at exactly 9 p.m. for 1 minute to protest the lack of transparency and the government's efforts to hide its connection to criminal organizations. About 100,000 workers marched in Ankara, demanding the truth about the state's collaboration with the CIA and the counter-guerrilla. To this day, the US has not acknowledged any responsibility for what happened in Turkey. In Turkey, only military dictatorship and fascism proved enough to suppress the rising proletarian movement. It's about maintaining the private property relation and US hegemony. The US doesn't give a single F about anything else. For all the feelings of sadness and despair that this story evokes, it's always important to remember that no matter how much they try, the ruling classes will never be able to defeat communism completely. They can only slow down the inevitable abolition of the system of genocide and exploitation and only delay the absolute self-determination of Kurdish, Armenian, and all oppressed peoples. No matter who wins in the election, the struggle will go on. This century of brutal repression has burned itself into the collective consciousness of the proletariat in Turkey and Kurdistan and will serve as a lesson for the new coming wave of revolutionary power. that will avenge its immortalized martyrs.
Bro, someone in the chat said, imagine watching this video and not thinking that the U.S. will backstab Kurds eventually. What do you mean eventually? This entire video is about the United States fucking over Kurdish revolutionaries inside of Turkey. And also on top of that, the United States literally to this day has a practice of arming, training, and riling up Kurdish militias only to use them against whoever they have, you know, as a destabilizing force, basically, only to then turn around and be like, yeah, you can kill all of them, actually. Here they are. They'll just be like, all right, we're stepping out of the way. It's time for the Turkish military to come in and fucking slaughter everybody. Bro, I'm Zaza, and my white German coworker said he won't visit Turkey because he's scared of being thrown in jail. I had to tell him that I, as a Turkish citizen with Zaza roots, have a higher risk of getting thrown into jail than his White House. Yeah. That's so fucking funny. Thinking that something is going to happen to you as like a white Christian guy in Turkey. Yeah, dude. Something will happen to you. You'll get, I mean, they'll lie to you about the price of shit. Not that it fucking matters, because the dollar conversion will help you. Yeah, you'll get fatter. Turkish food is bomb. Your hairline will improve if you're going there for that reason. But the notion that like something bad will happen to you is so laughable. It's not, I don't even know how to describe it. I don't know where to begin to describe it. You will definitely get ripped off though, for sure. That's a given.
The imperialist alliance with Turkish fascism, the flames of the 20th century, but the fire of liberation can never be extinguished.
Great video by Bestie Marks, by the way. Respect. Very cool. Very cool stuff.